Hello and welcome to this month's Risk Readiness webinar. I'm Ann Adams, a Senior Product Manager, Business Solutions at Risk Management Association. Today's webinar is the latest installment in Credit Trends and Commercial Lending, Credit Risk Navigator, and presented by Tom Cronin and AFS. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please just pop them into the Q&A and we'll address as many as we can at the end of the session. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Tom. Thanks again, Tom.
Thanks, Ann, and welcome to everybody. Happy middle of the summer. So today we're going to provide a report card for the first half of 2024. And the charts today will be comparing June 24 versus December 23. And we'll discuss what's changed over the first 6 months of this year. So a little bit different from our normal look. And we do have a couple of poll questions for both the CNI and CRE portfolios. A little follow-up from last month. And before I get into any of the detail, just to put the disclaimer out there, what you're going to see and hear today are my opinions and my analysis and are not meant to be investment advice. So our data comes from the Credit Risk Navigator. Let me clear that off a second. CRN, as we call it, is the oldest monthly commercial loan performance and credit quality benchmarking service in the U.S., having started in September of 2003. And last month, we had a question, or actually a couple of questions related to geography, performance. One was performance of office properties by geography. And I'd like to take a quick minute to explain how CRN displays locations and what levels are available. So I've pulled a couple of screenshots here for you. So in the CNI world, or the commercial and industrial, when we say location, we're talking the location of the borrower. With CRE, we're talking the location of the property, just to set that out. And then within both of those, CNI and CRE, we have the ability to look at 5 different levels of geography. What you see on the screen here right now are what we call the geography filter. The all level would be the world, and then you see USA, which is the second level. Underneath USA, we have 7 regions, and what I'm displaying here is the Eastern Midwest. And then within each region, there are a number of states, anywhere from around 8, I guess is probably about the closest, a little bit less. We also have the ability, so that's world, USA, region, state. On the next slide, we also have the ability to look at things a little bit further down at what's called the CBSA level. And this is what we used to call what used to be called the old MSA. I believe this is cities with populations of 25,000 and above. So you can get down, for instance, if you're looking in the South, then you could look at Alabama, then you could look at Birmingham. So you can gradually go down to the 5 different levels that we have, that we frequently show. And so the data is available by, pardon me, any of these levels if you choose. Okay, so let's start with the CNI portfolio, so the commercial and industrial. We defined CNI, pardon me, as business purpose loans to corporations with annual sales north of $1 million, plus or minus a little bit. These loans are manually underwritten and risk graded. So delinquency managed or exception managed loans are not included. And what you'll hear called owner occupied real estate is here in CNI. So we'll start with CNI performance. So this is the non-performing and delinquency trend. When I say non-performing, I mean 90 plus days past due and non-accruals. So if you look first at the green line, which is the short-term past dues, you can see in December it was at 0.46 and it's now at 0.26. So overall, an improvement. And what we saw that improved the most were 52 finance and insurance, 42 wholesale, and then 54 professional scientific companies. If you move to the blue line there at the bottom, that's the middle past dues, if you would. There's usually not many of these, and it's still holding true. In December, there was at 0.07. Now we're down to 0.05, so very slight improvement. The red line, though, up at the top, the non-performing, did see a little bit of an increase, so a slight decline in performance. In December was at 0.73, and it's now at 0.78. So we've gone up a little bit on non-accruals. So let's take a look on the next couple of slides as to what actually happened there. Sorry. I'll take a drink there. So here's the non-performing by NAICS code. In CRN, we had the ability to go down to the 6-digit level of NAICS. Here, we're just showing you the first 2 digits. You see on the far left, the average for all industries. And then there's 2 columns for each industry sector, showing you December in the blue and June in the, let's call it orange. And what I wanted to do here, because you see there are a couple that stick out in terms of changes. I wanted to talk about those, but I also want to let you know a little bit of the, if you would, the volume of these, or the prevalence, I guess is the right way of saying it. So you see the biggest jump there on the left-hand side is agriculture, going from about 0.5 to almost 3.5%. But I did want to caution that that's very localized to California, almost entirely to California, and almost entirely for tree nut farming. Beyond that, other crops and cattle, we're not seeing much. The other one, if you move towards the middle, 49 transportation and warehousing, you see that one jump significantly from 0.11% to 1.98%, so almost 2%. Again, this is a very localized or very minimal impact. It was almost all in Michigan and all for general warehousing. The one right next to that, however, 48 transportation and warehousing, not quite as big as a jump, went from 0.75 in December to 1.25, but a little more prevalent. So there were 2 subsectors that had some problems. Long distance trucking was one, and air support, support for airlines was the other. The long distance trucking, we saw activity in a number of states. So Tennessee, Illinois, Ohio, and California all experienced problems with long distance trucking. So to me, that sort of says that's a little bit more prevalent. That's a little bit more of an area to be concerned about, as opposed to the one-offs, if you would, in ag and general warehousing. The air support, we saw problems in New York and New Jersey. So maybe not quite as an issue as the long distance trucking. And a lot of the long distance trucking problems have been the result of these higher costs due to the inflation, obviously the higher gas costs, the higher transportation costs due to salaries, as well as we're beginning, and you'll see a little bit later on, some slowdowns in certain industries that would lead to less things being transported. Okay. So now we're going to move to credit quality, but we wanted to launch our first poll question. So Anne, if you could do that, please.
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay, so if you were with us last month, sorry, we asked about credit quality outlook, and most of you said you expected a decline. So given that, this is sort of our follow-up question. We're asking now, compared to 6 months ago, are your credit standards same as before, substantially tighter or somewhat tighter, somewhat looser or substantially looser? And an example of a credit standard would be, for instance, if you've tightened your credit standards, you might say, we no longer offer unsecured loans. That would be substantially tighter credit standards. So we'll give you a few seconds to fill that out.
Okay, great. Looks like most of the responses are submitted.
5% tighter, 45% substantially tighter, somewhat tighter. Okay. And basically nobody's loosening. Okay. All right. So let's move on to credit quality. So just a quick recap. So when a bank joins Credit Risk Navigator, we map their borrower risk ratings to the RMA 10-point scale. And on that scale, borrowers rated 1 through 6 are also known as pass. 7 is special mention. And then 8, 9, and 10 are classified, with 8 being substandard, 9 being doubtful, and 10 being loss. And our risk migration work has shown that a significant portion of the low passes, so the 6s, migrate to criticized, either special mention or classified. So on this chart, we have combined the low pass, the special mention, pardon me, and the classified into an overall category that we call distressed. And over the past 6 months, the overall distress levels have slowly accelerated from 24.6% to 26.2%, which matches last month's poll results, where 80% of you said that you were anticipating a decline in credit quality. So let's take a look at where some of that decline occurred. And here's the change in the overall percent distress for each 2-digit NAICS category or sector. And unlike what we saw with the non-performing change, where the increases and decreases were about the same, here we're seeing more increases in the overall percent distressed. Almost 3/4 of the sectors here saw an increase in percent distressed. Some not a lot, but overall we're seeing more distressed. And if you say distressed is the outlook, more outlooks are negative than positive. And leading the way with significant increases are 22 utilities. You see there on the left. Within that, the subsector that saw the most significant increase was solar power, and that was sort of broad. Again, want to make sure I tell you, whether things are localized or broad. Solar power was having problems, or is projected to have problems, in New York, Massachusetts, and California. The other sector where we saw some substantial increases, 51 information. The subsectors within that are music publishers, almost restricted entirely to California, and then cable broadcasting, which probably doesn't come as a surprise. And we're seeing increased levels of distress in Georgia, South Carolina, and New York. So a little more prevalent than what we saw from music publishers. All right. So here's one last look at C&I. And I threw this chart in this morning as I was coming in, because what I frequently do is I take a look at as I just did, what happens with the performance versus the credit quality. I want to see, which industries are performing well, but also the credit quality. What's the forecast for the credit quality? So here I've combined in the dots are the non-performing loans, measures that you just saw, and the columns are classified. So classified is 8, 9, and 10 on the RMA scale. So substandard, doubtful, and loss. So the worst credit quality, if you would. And as you go forward, I think you'd want to be aware of sectors where classified is not equal or in the same relative position as non-performers. And so if you look at this data, and this, unfortunately, chart is not in the deck that you're going to receive, but I'll make sure it gets out to you. If you come over to the far left, you see accommodation. It has a high classified level, but kind of an average performance level. So that would indicate that maybe there are more problems to come there. If you look back towards the middle, 53 real estate, again, you see a high classified level, probably the third highest, but a very low performance level. So an anticipation of problems there. And then back over, and I apologize for moving or skipping around. Healthcare, 62, again, back to the right. It's about medium to high classified level, so probably one of the highest, but about average performance. So with this chart, you begin to see a couple of industries that right now their performance is okay, for lack of a better word, but the projected performance or their credit quality, anticipated credit quality, is not that good. So these might be industries that, while performing okay right now, you might want to take a look at in anticipation that something might happen going down the road. Okay, so now we're going to switch over to CRE, and a quick definition of CRE. We follow the interagency guidance definition for CRE. And basically that says if more than 50% of the loan repayment comes from the sale or rental of a property, that's CRE. And you'll also hear this referred to as investor-owned properties. So here's the CRE performance. And again, the three measures: the short-term past dues, medium-term past dues, and then non-performing. And a little bit different here than what we saw with C&I. So if you start with the short term, the green line, December it was 0.56, and now I'm sorry, December was 0.49, June it's 0.56, so a slight decline in performance. And again, you see the volatility that we've been mentioning probably since April of 2020. Moving on to the 60 to 89 days past due, the blue line. In December, it was 0.14. It's now 0.23, so another decline in performance. And then if you move up to the red line, which is the non-performing, again, 90 days past due plus non-accruals, it's gone from 119 in December to 1.29% in June, so also declined. So all three performance measures for CRE deteriorated. I can't say that they deteriorated a significant amount, but they're all higher in June than they were at the beginning of the year. And if we remember, for C&I, only one measure had deteriorated, and it was very slight at that. So the CRE portfolio, and you'll see more detail in a second, is obviously had the problems with the economy, high inflation, high interest rates have had a bigger impact on CRE than it did on C&I. So here's our non-performing by property type. And these are the 8 largest property types. And when I say largest, I mean outstandings. There are other property types like recreation, educational, religious, but just not enough of them to really make any sort of observation about. So there's no secret. Office, far and away the worst performing property type, and it's deteriorated even more over the past 6 months. It's now slightly above 5%. And this has been called, again, no surprise, the slow return to office. And in addition to that, in general, less office space needed because of a variety of factors, AI and just total lack of office jobs. You're seeing vacancies as high as 22% in San Francisco. I also saw, pardon me, Houston's at 19%, Dallas at 18%, DC at 17. So, across the country, we're seeing a lot of problems with office properties. Beyond that, if you look at this, surprisingly, residential, there on the right side, has more than doubled. It's gone from 0.86 to 1.84. And what we're seeing, and I'm sure you're seeing this too, is that prices have hit a new high. I guess I saw that in June, the average sale of a house is now $427,000, which is 4% over June of 24, which is 4% over June of 23. I actually went back and looked at January of 2012, and the average price of a house sold in January 2012, so 12 years ago, was $140,000, which sort of blew me away, for lack of a better word. But even though the prices are high, the sales are declining. because of the increased interest rates. A lot of people are now being priced out of the market, increased interest rates and an increase in the price of the house. So sales have declined now for 4 straight months. They're now down to 3.9 million for June. In February, they were at 4.4 million. So I think that's why you're seeing some of the issues in residential. I also looked at some of the locations, and a lot of the residential problems are in the Western Midwest. We're also seeing a little bit in the Northeast and the Southwest. And one more thing here, if you look lodging had been doing very well, had been improving quite substantially, but it's eased back up again, which to me was sort of a surprise. Most notably, we're seeing problems with lodging in the Northeast and the West, and a little bit in the Western Midwest, although that's a very small dollar amount. So I wouldn't, 1 or 2 bad loans kind of exasperate the issue. But that's where we're seeing problems. All right, so before we go on to credit quality, we want to launch our second poll, which is very similar to what we just did. So Anne, if you could launch that. So again, last month, I think 80% of you said that you expected credit quality, to decline. So now we're asking the same thing as we did with the C&I. What do you think has been happening with your credit standards?
Okay, great. Thank you. Looks like we have most of the responses.
41, 18, 41, somewhat. Okay, very similar to C&I. Okay. All right, so I'll close this out and we'll move on. So here's CRE distressed. And overall, the overall picture here, just like C&I, the distress levels for CRE inched up. I'll call it inched up a little bit since December of 23. But unlike C&I, if you look at these, the blue, yellow, red, the increased levels that we're seeing in what we're calling distress are primarily with the criticized portion of the portfolio. You can see that the blue is actually contracted a little bit. It's really the yellow and the red, so the special mention and more so the red, which is the classified, which are have increased, which is the worst thing that you don't want that to happen. If you look at this, particularly the criticized by property type, office leads the way, no surprise there, 22%. Lodging's at 15%, health's at 13%, and multifamily's at 10%. And we're going to talk about multifamily in a little bit, but a little bit different. Same increase as C&I, but a little bit different composition, if you would. So what's happening? What's the outlook for each of these major property types as of June 24 compared to December 23? And obviously, you pick up any publication, American Banker, Wall Street Journal, any article on banking, the first thing they're talking about, if it's not deposits, is commercial real estate, and usually they're talking about offices. But I think there's more going on than just offices. So if you look at this, outside of multifamily, we're not seeing many dramatic changes if you look at December versus June. Within multifamily, though, it's up a little bit. And what we're hearing, it's primarily because over the past half year, and actually a little bit further than that, there's been a large amount of apartments coming online. So the market's being saturated. which in turn has slowed growth, has slowed rent growth. So you have these, particularly the Class A properties coming online, and REITs and other companies are not able to raise the prices because there's just so many there. What's helping them out, though, and the reason why I think you're not seeing it go up much more, is what we talked about earlier with residential housing, where the property type residential has gone up. Pardon me, the sale has gone up so high, the sale price, but a lot of people can't afford a house and they have to get into an apartment. So you have those two factors there, sort of pulling each other opposite ways. Within multifamily, we're seeing a big jump in distress in the West, particularly in California and Washington. And we're also seeing some areas of stress, if you would, in Florida and Texas. So kind of the areas that you would have traditionally thought of doing very well are seeing some problems. I'd also want to point out here industrial properties, which would be the third highest amount. And, you know, post-COVID or in the midst of COVID, I won't say everybody, but a lot of people were hitting Amazon, and, you know, your FedEx trucks are going up and down the streets, and people were building warehouses, distribution centers like crazy. And what's happened is the demand has fallen off. And again, I said we're going to mention housing a couple of times. With the houses not being sold, you're not seeing increase in sale, or you're seeing a drop in sales for furniture and appliances and then building materials. And that in turn has led to closures for distribution centers. A couple of examples of distribution centers that have closed are Ashley Furniture and Home Depot. So it's kind of a ripple effect, like 2 or 3 layers down. What's happening with, you know, the housing prices and the interest rates, housing not moving, lodging, industrial properties sitting vacant. All right. So one last chart, and I mentioned this a little bit different, you know, just a quick comparison this time. So we'll give you a lot of time back today. So here's the current performance, the non-performing in the blue dots versus what I'd call projected performance, or the classified loans. And a couple of things I think that are interesting to look at here. And again, you want these things to be in the relatively same position. So I'm surprised, first of all, to see office. It's the worst performing. You can see the blue dot up there close to 5%, but it's one of the better classified, around 4% classified. So that seemed to me a little strange, until I started thinking that probably means that a lot of the office properties have probably already, that are going to go bad, have already been, you know, taken care of, for lack of a better word. Lodging is the other one, and we have talked about this really since COVID started, and people stopped traveling and stopped, you know, staying in hotels, and they had problems. You can see that the blue dot, the non-performing level, it's still high, but it's come way down. But the classified amount is one of the highest, which would lead me to say that maybe, you know, the problems in lodging aren't over yet. And what we've heard, particularly through, or, you know, more so a year or two ago, a lot of banks had worked with their borrowers, pardon me, and the regulators had allowed them to restructure some of these loans. And I think that's what we might be seeing here, is that, you know, 2-3 years ago, a lot of these properties that were in a normal environment, you might just go ahead and, you know, write off and take it into OREO. You went ahead and restructured them, and now they're still sitting there in what I call a classified situation. So that's it. I did want to mention that when we're back next month, we've had a lot of requests for demos of the system. So next month, we'll do the July data first, And then I'll do a full demo of the Credit Risk Navigator system if you're interested in sticking with us for that. But Ann, I'll turn it back to you for any questions.
Great, thank you. We do have one question so far, and do feel free to type any questions you have as well into the chat. But the question that we have is, I expected to see retail non-performing higher. Why is it so low? As I'm hearing about a number of retail stores, malls closing.
Yeah, that's it's I don't have a good answer for you, to be perfectly honest. We talk a lot here, my colleagues Doug Skinner and Jeremy Charlson and I talk a lot here about, particularly when interest rates were high, when inflation was high and then interest rates were high, we kept talking about, it's got to happen. Some industries, particularly consumer discretionary industries, are going to get hit. And what we're finding is that some are getting hit. And it seems the ones with poor fundamentals, so like Bed Bath and Beyond, I'm trying to think of some of the other major ones that went under. Pier 1, who my wife had worked for, that went bankrupt. Some of these companies that had poor fundamentals and were, say, speculative, non-investment grade, have been hit hard and are losing. But a lot of your better managed, better off retailers are doing fine. And the retail, I don't have the note with me, the retail commercial real estate market is strong outside of the malls. And the malls are, particularly the one that's right down the street from us, you're seeing a lot of malls being repurposed with either, a lot of restaurants going into malls, activity centers. I can't remember the exact name, but the one down the street from us, the Exton Mall, has a bowling alley in there now that used to be in one of the main stores. So retail, in my mind, has been one of the surprises of this high inflation, high interest rate environment.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know that there was a mall that in Florida that actually turned into a church, and one of the anchors was repurposed to be a church. Someone else made a comment that Simon Properties gave the keys back to the bank on a mall in Philadelphia.
Yep.
So I agree with what you're saying too. This, certain pockets of retail is getting hit differently.
Yeah.
Other question is regarding the PowerPoint. Yes, the PowerPoint will be sent to attendees next week. Just to ensure that you do receive it when you register for the webinar, you have to click the opt-in, because that's what releases your email to be able to receive the PowerPoint. Give it another, yep. Thank you. Andrew says this was excellent. That's always great to hear that feedback.
Thank you.
Give it another second or two to see if there's any other questions. So great, thank you. We can conclude the webinar. You will be receiving a survey also. Please do take a few moments to provide your feedback. It always helps us be better. And thank you, and have a great afternoon. And thank you again, Tom.
Thanks, Ann. Bye.
Bye.